Hi guys, I'm Lucian Graves, and with today's video, this afternoon's video, I will be doing chapter 2 of my book Saint Samuel. Uh, for those of you that are just now getting introduced to this, chapter 1 is in my feed. Uh, and a little disclaimer here is that this book does loosely follow bits and pieces of my life. Um, Most of what you're going to hear in here is metaphors or bits that I've incorporated from other people that I know, people that have lived within this life, and the life I used to live. Let me just put that out there. I no longer do this. I am about 7 years out of it at this point, but because of some of the things that I've been subjected to, I am now in therapy. It took me a long time to cross that bridge into it, and that's a lot of what drove me to write this book. Uh, Most of the metaphors that you're going to hear in here, like where it talks about, like the murder or this and that, it's not where, I've seen people literally die or anything like that. I'm not that kind of person, uh, nor have I witnessed anything like that. Okay. What it's talking about in there are pieces of my soul that I've given up in order to get to where I'm at, if that makes sense. Um, I do not justify, I do not glorify, I do not condone this kind of lifestyle. So, with that being said, I'll go ahead and I'll jump into chapter 2, the cost of running. The night stretched ahead of Samuel like a dark promise. The hum of the truck's engines kept on. The hum of the truck's engine, the only sound keeping him tethered to reality. The cigarette was gone, the smoke long faded, but the taste of it lingered, bitter, stale, something that refused to leave. He didn't know how long he had been driving. He didn't care. The highway signs blurred past him, mile markers ticking away like the last beats of a song that had been playing too long. He wasn't going anywhere in particular, just away. Away from the choices that sat heavy on his chest. Away from the judge's words, from Rachel's cold stare, from the quiet truth that clawed at the back of his mind. That was the thing about running. It never really took you anywhere. He was still the same man he had been back at the rig, standing in the locker room with Dylan's shadow hanging over him. He was still the same man who had nodded, sealing himself further into a life he swore he could control. The same man who had spent years telling himself he wasn't the villain. That wasn't his fault. That this wasn't his fault. But the weight of the gun in the glove compartment said otherwise. The blood money in the locker said otherwise. The hollow look in his son's eyes said otherwise. Samuel tightened the grip on the wheel. Up ahead, a gas station flickered in the darkness, its buzzing neon sign casting a sickly glow on the pavement. He pulled in without thinking. His tires crunched against the gravel as he rolled to a stop beside the pump. He sat there for a long moment staring at the empty parking lot. The place looked half dead. One flickering light, a rusted out payphone by the door, and a cashier slouched behind a counter barely paying attention. It was the kind of place where people like him just passed through but never stayed. The kind of place for men like him. He climbed out of the truck, stretching the stiffness from his bones as the cold air bit into his skin. He didn't need gas, didn't need anything, but he still stepped inside anyways. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in ugly, washed out glow. The cashier barely glanced up from his phone as Samuel wandered towards the back, past the cooler filled with beer, past the energy drinks. He stopped in front of the cigarettes, staring at them like they held the answer he wasn't ready for. The voice, a voice broke the silence behind him. You look like a man who's got too much on his mind. Samuel tensed. He turned slowly, his eyes landing on the man leaning against the aisle. Mid-40s, thin, dressed in a faded denim jacket and a trucker cap pulled low over his eyes. There was something about him that set Samuel on edge, not in a direct way, but in a way stray dogs watched each other, sizing up whether to fight or pass by. Samuel didn't answer. Elias smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I see guys like you all the time, on the road, middle of the night, staring at nothing. He nodded towards the cigarettes, trying to decide if lighting one up is going to make everything sit just right, or for just a little while longer. Samuel exhaled through his nose, turning back to the shelf. Elias chuckled. Silence. That's a good move. Never know who you're talking to these days. Samuel grabbed a pack, turning toward the register. But the man spoke again, voice lower this time. You ever hear a saying, a man running in circles calls it a journey? Samuel stopped. Elias's smile didn't waver, just something to think about. Samuel eyed him for a moment, then shook his head and walked away. By the time he had paid for his cigarettes and stepped outside, the stranger was gone. He stood there for a second, the cold bite in the back of his neck before climbing into his truck. He tossed the pack onto the seat, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. A man running in circles calls it a journey. He closed his eyes. Then he put truck in gear and drove straight towards the next mistake. The highway stretched before him, before Samuel in an unbroken line, a thread of darkness woven through the Texas plains. The gas station was already a memory swallowed by the night, but the stranger's words lingered. A man running in circles calls it a journey. Damn idiot. Samuel clenched his jaw, forcing the thought out of his head. He didn't need riddles from some drifter. He needed clarity, a plan, something that made sense. But sense was in short supply these days. The phone on the passenger seat vibrated again, skittering against the cracked vinyl. He glanced at it, knowing before he even picked it up it wouldn't be Rachel, wouldn't be his lawyer, wouldn't be anything good. Dylan, 2 a.m., don't forget. Samuel exhaled sharply, pressing his thumb against the screen. His first instinct was to delete it, to throw the damn phone out the window, watch it shatter against the asphalt and pretend none of it existed. But that wasn't how this worked, not anymore. He locked the phone and tossed it back into the seat. He had a few hours before the meet, and he needed to clear his head. His fingers itched towards the pack of cigarettes, but he ignored them, gripping the wheel instead. He knew where he was going before he even let himself admit it. It wasn't home. It wasn't anywhere safe, but it was somewhere familiar. The bar sat just outside town, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions. A neon sign blinked cold beer, hot food, though everyone knew that was the second part was just a lie. The gravel lot was half full, trucks lined up like soldiers waiting to be sent into battle. Samuel pulled in, killed the engine, and sat there for a second, listening to the ticking of the cooling motor. He shouldn't be here, but he was, because the alternative was going home and staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence and knowing that every bad decision had led him right back to this point. He shoved the door open and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. The bar smelled like spilled whiskey and fried grease, a scent familiar to almost so familiar it felt almost comfortable. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and a low murmur of voices. A few heads turned when he walked in, but nobody cared enough to stare. Just another man looking to drink whatever ghost had been following him away. He slid onto a bar stool, nodding to the bartender, whiskey. The man poured without a word, and Samuel downed it in one swallow, feeling the burn settle in his chest. For a second, for a few seconds, everything blurred. No Dylan, no custody battles, no weight pressing down on his lungs. Just the taste of alcohol and the hum of a distant old country song playing through busted speakers. But peace was short-lived in that. But a peace was a short-lived thing in places like this. Sam, the voice hit him like a fist to the ribs. He knew that voice. He hadn't heard it in years. Slowly he turned, and there she was, Sarah, the kind of woman who belonged to another life, a life before all of this. Her dark hair was shorter now, streaks of gray at the edges, but her eyes were the same, sharp, knowing the kind of eyes that saw through every ounce of bullshit a man tried to hide. He hadn't thought about her in a long time. He tried not to, but seeing her now standing there in a worn out denim jacket, looking at him like she already knew he was drowning, it did something to him. Didn't expect to see you here, she said, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. Samuel exhaled slowly, rolling his empty glass between his fingers. Didn't expect to be here. Sarah nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. She flagged down the bartender, ordering a beer, then turned back to him. Still in the oil fields? Yeah, something like that. A pause, a silence that wasn't quite comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. Then she said it. You look like hell, Sam. He huffed out a laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, feels like it too. She took a sip of her beer, studying him. You back in some kind of trouble? His stomach twisted. Sarah always had been like this, cutting straight through the noise, never let him hide behind easy answers. It was why they worked once. It was also why they hadn't lasted. Samuel drummed his fingers against the bar, staring at the worn wood. He could lie, could brush it off, tell her he was just tired, just going through a rough patch. But something in him was tired of lying, so he met her gaze. I don't think I know how to be anything else. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't look away. She just sighed, setting her beer down with a soft thud. Then you better figure out if it's worth it. She slid a few bills onto the bar and stood, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Take care of yourself, Sam. And just like that, she was gone. Samuel sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been. The whiskey was wearing off. Reality was setting back in. He checked his phone. It's 1:37 a.m. The meet was in 23 minutes. He pushed away from the bar, tossed a 20 on the counter, and stepped back into the cold. No more running. It was time to see just how deep this hole went. The cold air hit Samuel like a slap, sobering but not enough. He clenched his jaw, rubbing a hand over his face as he crossed the parking lot, gravel crunching beneath his boots, the sound too loud in the silence. Sarah's words still hung in his head. Then you better figure out if it's worth it. She had always been like that, planting seeds of doubt where he couldn't afford to let them grow. But the doubt was a luxury, and men like him, they didn't get luxuries. He slid back into the truck, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life. The whiskey in his veins had thinned out, leaving behind a sharp, aching clarity. He checked the time. It was 1:41 a.m., 18 minutes. He wasn't far from the drop, but distance wasn't the problem. What came next was. Samuel pulled onto the highway, the road stretching ahead like an open wound. He knew better than to overthink it. This wasn't the first time he had done a run for Dylan, and it wouldn't be the last. At least that's what he kept telling himself. But something about tonight felt different. The way Dylan had looked at him back at the rig, the way he said this one's important. Important meant risk, and risk meant bodies. Samuel exhaled through his nose, pushing the thought away. He'd get in, drop the weight, get out, simple, clean, just like always. So why did it feel like he was walking into something he couldn't come back from? The road signs blurred past, and soon he was there. The meet. A dirt lot stretched ahead, hidden just off the road, tucked between skeletal trees and a chain-link fence. Rusted at the edges, a single street light flickered overhead, barely holding back the dark. Samuel pulled in, slow, rolling to a stop beside an old black Tahoe. Its windows were so tinted were tinted so dark they swallowed the light. He killed the engine and sat for a second, fingers tapping against the wheel. His gut was tight, cold like something he couldn't name. Then the Tahoe's driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Not Dylan. And Samuel's pulse ticked up. He didn't know this guy. Tall, lean, mid-40s, wearing a faded leather jacket and a look that said he didn't have time for conversation. Samuel got out, keeping his movement slow, measured. He wasn't here to make enemies. The man nodded towards the truck. You got the package? Samuel's fingers twitched. Something was off. Dylan never sent new people without heads up. Where's Dylan? Samuel asked. The man exhaled, tilting his head slightly. Busy. That wasn't an answer. Samuel forced himself to stay loose, but every nerve in his body was screaming. Where's it at? The man said, stepping forward. Samuel didn't move. The man's hand hovered near his waist. Not obvious, but enough. Samuel's stomach twitched. This wasn't a drop, it was a test. He glanced past the Tahoe, spotting a second vehicle parked in the shadows. Another truck, lights off, engine humming. Someone was watching, waiting. His throat went dry. If this was a test, there's only two outcomes: pass or disappear. Samuel swallowed hard, reached for the keys, opened the truck door, stepping back just enough to keep the man in his peripherals. The man moved to check the duffel bag, unzipping it just enough to see what was inside. Samuel knew what he'd find: bricks of tightly wrapped powder, clean and untouched. But this wasn't about the product. This was about him. The man nodded once, closing the bag, then met Samuel's gaze. You're on the hook now. It wasn't a warning, it was a fact. Samuel forced a slow breath, nodding because he did. This wasn't about another run. This was a step deeper, and there was no way back. The man patted the duffel and stepped away, nodding towards the second truck. A door opened and a figure stepped out, moving slow. Samuel didn't recognize him at first, but then the light hit just enough for his stomach, and his stomach dropped. It was Hector Ruiz, a name he hadn't heard in years, a name that should have stayed buried. Ruiz was a ghost, a man who moved in whispers, the kind of predator who didn't leave loose ends. Samuel had seen him once before, years back, in a different life, back when he was still just a guy on the edge, not fully in, not fully out. But now, Ruiz was standing 10 feet away, looking at him like he was already dead. Samuel's hands curled into fists. Dylan hadn't thrown him a job, he had thrown him into the fire. And if Samuel wasn't careful, he wouldn't make it out. Samuel drove. The highway stretched before him, empty and endless, a black vein cutting through the earth. The meat was over, but the weight was gone, and he was still breathing. So why did it feel like he had just buried himself alive? His grip on the wheel tightened until his knuckles ached. The hum of the tires against the road should have been grounding. Something steady, something real. But everything in his head was unraveling, pulling apart thread by thread. He had just handed over a shipment worth more than he would make in a year. Had looked Ruiz right in the eyes and walked away intact. But that was the problem. Why had he walked away? Ruiz wasn't the kind of man to let strangers in. He wasn't the kind of man who appeared just to sign off on a simple job. His presence meant something. And Samuel knew, deep in his bones, that whatever had just happened wasn't a transaction. It was a shift, a shove, a choice being made for him while he just stood there nodding like a fool. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. The bar was still burning in the back of his skull, Sarah's voice cutting through the fog. Then you better figure out if it's worth it. Worth what? The money? The life? The way his son had looked at him during the last custody hearing? quiet, uncertain, already slipping through his fingers. Samuel had ran Samuel ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble, the sweat, the exhaustion sinking deeper in his skin. He could hear the judge's voice in his head. Mr. Harris, your employment history and financial stability are questionable at best. We need to ensure the child's environment is safe and structured. Safe, structured. What the hell did that even mean? He worked harder than half the men he knew, breaking his back under the Oklahoma sun, fighting tooth and nail for scraps they called a paycheck. And it still wasn't enough. Not enough for Rachel, not enough for the courts, not enough for Dylan, for Ruiz, or any of those bastards who looked at him and saw the man desperate enough to say yes. The speedometer crept past 80, then 90. His chest was tight, his breathing was shallow. The air in the cab felt thin, like the truck was shrinking around him. His own damn skin felt too tight. He could still see Ruiz's face, the way he had looked at Samuel, like he already knew what came next. Like the decision had been made before Samuel even showed up. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? He wasn't the one making choices anymore. He was just moving forward, step by step, deeper into something he had no control over. Something that would swallow him whole. A flicker of movement on the road ahead snapped him back. His foot slammed on the brakes, the truck fishtailing in the gravel and spat underneath, as gravel spat underneath the tires. A deer. It stood in the middle of the road, frozen, its eyes reflecting on the headlights like twin mirrors. For half a second they stared at each other. Samuel's breath came ragged, his pulse thudding under his skull, and then the deer turned and bolted, disappearing into the brush. Samuel sat there, engine idling, fingers still clenching around the wheel. He had almost hit it, almost wrecked, and for a split second he wanted to. He pressed the heel of his palm against his forehead, eyes squeezing shut. He was unraveling. He had spent years telling himself that he wasn't the bad man, that things he did weren't who he was, that this was just a phase, a survival tactic, a means to an end. But standing in that lot, staring at Ruiz, he hadn't felt like a man doing what he had to. He felt like a man standing on the wrong side of the line. And once you crossed it, there was no crossing it back. He inhaled deeply and let it out slow. The phone vibrated against the seat. He didn't look, didn't need to. It was Dylan. It was more work. It was another inch deeper into the pit. Samuel reached for it, then stopped. His fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation crawling up his spine. He thought about his son, about the last time he had hugged him, the way the boy felt too small in his arms, too fragile, like the world was already pressing down on him. He thought about Rachel's face in the courtroom, set in stone, convinced that Samuel would never be anything more than a mistake waiting to happen. He thought about the gun in his glove compartment, the money in his locker, the look in Ruiz's eyes. The phone vibrated again. Samuel closed his hand around it. A man running in circles calls it a journey. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then slowly he hit the decline. He didn't throw the phone out the window, didn't smash it against the dashboard. He just let it sit there, silent. For the first time in a long time, he chose not to answer. But deep down, he knew the choices like that never lasted. Samuel sat in the cab, his breath still uneven, hands trembling against the wheel. The phone lay face down on the seat, the rejected call already sinking into silence. For a moment, he told himself he had done something good, something right. But the world didn't stop spinning just because a man hesitated. Another text came through. Dylan, don't make me come find you. Samuel exhaled through his teeth, jaw locking tight. The illusion of control had lasted less than a minute. He knew what would happen if he ignored Dylan too long. People like him didn't handle silence too well. They didn't take unanswered calls as simple no. They took them as a problem, and problems got dealt with. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, gripping the roots until the scalp burned. He couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't keep spiraling between what he wanted and what he had already become. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? It wasn't about the next job or the next shipment. It was about the fact that there was no exit. He wasn't some lost soul trying to find his way out. He was a guy who had already sold the map and spent the money. A flicker of headlights pulled his attention to the rearview mirror, a vehicle coming up. He tensed. The Tahoe. It had to be. Dylan wasn't wasting time tonight. Samuel shifted into drive, his pulse spiking. He wasn't ready for this conversation. Not here, not like that. He pulled off the shoulder, tires kicking up gravel, easing back onto the highway. The other vehicle followed. Then the phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Pull over. His breath hitched. Dylan? No. This was someone else. Samuel's fingers twitched towards the glove compartment. The gun was there, fully loaded, waiting. His gut twisted. Was this how it ended? Not with a shootout, not with sirens, not with some grand reckoning, just a quiet road and an unmarked vehicle behind him, waiting for him to fold. His mind spiraled through thoughts crashing into each other. This isn't about drugs anymore. Ruiz had been there tonight. This meant something was bigger. Bigger than Dylan, bigger than Samuel had ever planned for. And that meant he was either useful or disposable. He gritted his teeth. If they wanted to kill him, they wouldn't have been texting him first. That left one option. They were about to make an offer, one he wouldn't be allowed to refuse. Samuel's grip on the wheel tightened, his heart slamming against his ribs. Because if that was the case, then all of his choices, the custody battle, the jobs, the justification, they had already been decided for him. And maybe they always had been. His voice hovered, his foot hovered over the gas pedal, the weight of the gun in the glove compartment pressing against his thoughts. Pull over, run, choose. But was there really a choice left at all? The road stretched ahead, endless and empty, darkness pressing in from all sides. The vehicle behind him didn't back off. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Last chance. Samuel's throat went dry. He should have kept driving. Should press the gas pedal. Push the truck to its limits and put as much distance between him and whatever was coming. But he didn't. Because deep down he knew the truth. You don't outrun men like this. He let off the accelerator, the truck's speed dropping, gravel crunching as he veered onto the shoulder, the tires rolling to a stop, silence hitting like a punch. The other vehicle slowed behind him, its headlights washing over the cab in white. Samuel flexed his fingers against the wheel. His heart hammered. His body screamed at him to act, to run, to fight, to do something. But he just sat there, hands clenching, jaw locked. A door opened behind him, footsteps, slow, measured. He reached for the glove compartment, fingers brushing against the handle, then a knock. Not on his window, the passenger side. He swallowed hard. Whoever this was, they weren't sneaking. They weren't trying to hide in the dark. They wanted to look him in the eye. Then Samuel turned his head, pulse a wild drumbeat in his throat. A shadow loomed outside the glass, a man tall and broad, dressed in dark clothes. He couldn't make out his face, just the shape, the weight of his presence pressing against the night. The passenger door opened, and Samuel let it. The man slid into the seat like he belonged there. This wasn't just another this was just another business transaction, just another conversation in a long line of choices already made. Samuel felt the weight of it, the shift in the air, the quiet authority radiating off of him. This wasn't Dylan, wasn't Ruiz. This was something else. Someone higher up the chain. The man shut the door, exhaling slow. He turned his head, and for his first time Samuel saw his face. Calm, controlled, eyes sharp, dark, dissecting him in real time. You made the drop, the man said, his voice smooth and even, and yet you hesitated. Samuel said nothing. The man tilted his head. That's not good. Samuel swallowed. Who are you? The man smiled. A man with an interest in you. Samuel's jaw tensed. I don't even know who the hell you are. That's the problem, isn't it? The man leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving Samuel's. You don't know who any of us are. You don't know what you've stepped into. You've been taking orders, playing the errand boy, thinking you're just running wait for a paycheck. Samuel stayed silent. The man's smile faded. You're past that now. Something cold slid down Samuel's spine. You met Ruiz tonight, the man continued. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't a coincidence. That was us deciding whether or not you're worth keeping. Samuel's pulse thumped harder against his ribs, and he said in a voice low. The man studied him, then reached into his coat. Samuel tensed, muscles coiling, but the man didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and placed it on the dashboard. Samuel hesitated, then slowly picked it up and unfolded it. His stomach dropped. It was a photograph, a picture of his son at school, taken from a distance. Samuel felt the blood drain from his face. A slow, suffocating silence filled the cab. You're not just another runner anymore, the man said, his voice almost sympathetic. You're an asset. And assets? They follow orders. Samuel's fingers clenched the paper, his entire body locking up. His breath turned shallow, heartbeat hammering behind his ribs. This wasn't about drugs. This wasn't about money. This was control. They owned him now. The man leaned forward, voice quiet, no more hesitation. Samuel stared at the photograph, edges crumpling against under the pressure of his grip. Everything he had told himself, that he could walk away, that he had a choice, that he wasn't already too deep. It had been a lie, and now he was theirs. Samuel continued staring at the photograph, his son's small figure frozen in time. The world outside the truck disappeared. There was no road, no wind, no cold Texas night. Just this, just them. His fingers curled tighter, the edges of the pictures bending under the pressure. Where did you get this? He asked, voice low, barely more than a whisper. The man inside didn't move, didn't blink. We make it our business to know everything about you. Samuel's breath came sharp through his nose. His heart wasn't just pounding, it was suffocating him. The man continued, his tone casual, almost conversational. We know your son's name, where he lives, what time he gets dropped off in the morning, what time his mother picks him up. A pause. And what time she sometimes doesn't. Samuel's hands trembled. Rachel worked long hours. Sometimes his son stayed late at daycare waiting for her to get off. Alone, vulnerable, and they knew. His stomach twisted, nausea creeping up his throat. You're making this into something it isn't, Samuel forced out, the words brittle. The man exhaled, amused. Am I? Samuel wanted to move, wanted to grab him, crushing, break his face against the dashboard until there was nothing left but blood and regret. But that wouldn't fix anything, because this wasn't a threat. This was a promise. We don't want to hurt your boy, the man said. That would be a waste, a distraction. He turned, his gaze sharp and dissecting. What we want is you, focused, reliable, and obedient. Samuel's hands twitched. He was drowning in something he couldn't escape. They had him. They had everything. He turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto the man's. You think this makes me loyal? He asked, voice dangerously quiet. The man smirked, loyal. He shook his head. No, Samuel, it makes you predictable. The words hit harder than any punch, because they were right. He wasn't in control, never had been. He was just reacting like a dog on a leash tugging at the collar, thinking he had some kind of say in how tight it got. The man tapped the dashboard, signaling the conversation was over. We'll be in touch. Then just like that, he was gone. The door clicked shut. Footsteps retreated. The car behind him pulled away, disappearing into the night, and Samuel sat there, shaking, burning, dying from the inside out. He stared at the photograph again, his son's small, unknowing face staring back at him, and something inside of him snapped. For years he had told himself that everything he had was for his boy, that he was grinding, hustling, pushing the limits for him, that the money, the risk, the deals, it was all to get ahead, to win, to finally be able to say to the court, see, I can provide. I can be the father he needs. But now, staring at the picture, feeling the weight of it crushing, he realized the truth. He wasn't fighting for his son. He was fighting for himself, for his pride, for the pathetic, useless hope that he could be something more than he had already become. And his son, he was just collateral. Samuel squeezed his eyes shut, his chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. The rage, the guilt, the self hatred coiled so tight inside of him that he thought he might tear himself apart. But none of that mattered anymore. Not when they had their hooks in him. Not when his son's life was a bargaining chip on a table. Samuel inhaled slowly, steadying, his hands forcing down the fire in his throat. No more hesitating, no more questioning, no more pretending he had a way out. He put the truck in drive and the road stretched before him like an open grave. He would do what he needed to be done because if there was one thing Samuel Harris knew, it was this: a man like him doesn't get to be a hero. And with that concludes chapter 2. Um, I appreciate y'all sitting through it. If you've made it this far, you are awesome. Uh, for those of you that are new to this, I have extreme anxiety, and as part of the whole therapy thing that I'm doing with this, is I'm trying to make it easier for me to communicate with people and stuff like that. So, it, on multiple fronts, I'm trying to either heal myself or help somebody else. And if I can do both at the same time, that's awesome. But I appreciate y'all for being here. I appreciate you for listening and watching this. I know I'm not the best, you know, person to be the face of this, but right now I'm all I've got, and I just appreciate you for, listening. Y'all have a wonderful night.